The midday sun blazed over a small southern town, so harsh that the asphalt shimmered with rising heat. On the main street, the grocery store, the gas station, and the auto shop quietly went about their business. Locals sat on porches, sipping iced tea, watching cars roll by. Amid that seemingly calm scene, a gleaming black SUV glided slowly down the road. Behind the wheel sat a tall black man in his 50s, shoulders squared, face composed. He wore a plain shirt, no badge, no sign of who he was. Only his eyes, cold, steady, watchful, betrayed that he was seeing more than just the road ahead. At the corner, 2 patrol cars were already waiting. The police radio crackled. "Black male, expensive SUV, doesn't belong here." A scoffing laugh followed. "Easy target, let's have some fun." Red and blue lights flashed, sirens splitting the heavy afternoon air. Heads turned on the sidewalks. The man calmly steered to the curb. No panic, no surprise. He stepped out, laid his hands lightly on the hood, sunlight glinting off the steel watch strapped to his wrist. A young officer swaggered up, voice dripping with mockery. "This car doesn't fit someone like you. Out of the vehicle now!" Laughter broke out from the cluster of officers behind him, echoing down the street in broad daylight, right in front of dozens of witnesses. The man said nothing. He simply stared straight ahead, eyes so calm they unsettled the ones trying to provoke him. One officer shoved his shoulder, baiting for a reaction. Still, he didn't flinch, no resistance. But his silence and composure only made them angrier, as if they were the ones being tested. Across the street, a young man raised his phone to record. An elderly woman shook her head softly. "Another one of these again?" Then her voice lowered. "Wait. Something about him isn't the same." The officers snapped handcuffs around his wrists, grinning as if they had already won. But when the cold metal locked shut, the man's watch caught the sun, a faint green light pulsing once across its face, a signal no one there understood. Within minutes, the entire town would learn the truth. The stranger they thought was easy prey was in fact the one man even the most dangerous figures in the shadows feared most, FBI's most feared commander. The cuffs snapped shut in the heat of noon. Officers exchanged knowing grins, satisfied with their prize. A black man in a polished SUV, exactly the kind of target they had built careers on. He gave them nothing to work with. His face was calm, his movements controlled. That composure unnerved them more than defiance ever could. One officer bent close and whispered, "Keep quiet if you want. It won't save you." His partner searched him with unnecessary force, but every pocket came up clean. Still, they moved as though the outcome had already been written. On the walk to the squad car, the air shimmered above the asphalt. The man's stride was steady, his shoulders set, his gaze locked straight ahead. When they pushed his head down to shove him inside, he absorbed the gesture without flinching. Behind the glass, his eyes found the rearview mirror. The driver caught the reflection for only a second before looking away. It felt less like control and more like exposure. The radio burst to life. Dispatch wanted an update. "Subject in custody. Possible stolen vehicle," the driver said smoothly. The words rolled off his tongue, polished and hollow. They'd written that script countless times before, bending paperwork into a shield against accountability. At the precinct, the routine continued. He was paraded past the front desk, booked under a vague charge, and escorted into a bare holding room. His identification was set aside, deliberately ignored. No one spoke his name. To them, he was already reduced to a line in a file. Inside the room, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Officers lingered by the door, arms crossed, trading jokes to mask the tension. "County will eat him alive," one scoffed. Another added, "Guys like this fold before the first hearing." Their laughter was loud, but not convincing. Across the table, the man sat upright. Even with his wrists bound, his presence filled the space. He didn't plead, didn't curse, didn't ask for counsel. The silence wasn't weakness, it was weight. Every second stretched longer, pressing against the walls until the mockery in the room thinned. Down the hall, a younger officer decided to run his name. Fingers tapped at the keyboard. The system froze, then returned a warning. Access denied. He frowned, tried again, received the same result. A third attempt locked him out completely. He cursed under his breath, unsettled. Routine suspects didn't trigger restricted access. When he shared what he saw, the others dismissed it. "System glitch," they said. "Just mark him as John Doe." They laughed again, eager to bury the discomfort. But the young officer couldn't shake the thought. Denials like that weren't random. He glanced back through the glass. The man's eyes were waiting for him, sharp and steady. There was no anger there, no fear either, just the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly what was unfolding. For the first time since the arrest, doubt spread through the room. The officers thought they had captured control. In truth, the balance had already shifted. The holding room grew hotter under the buzzing lights. The man remained motionless, back straight, hands bound in front of him. Across the table, the officers shifted restlessly. Their bravado from the street had started to fade. Something about his silence pressed harder than any words. An older sergeant entered, flipping through paperwork that was barely filled out. "What's his name?" he asked. None of them answered. They had avoided it since the start. "We'll write him up as an unknown for now," one muttered, trying to sound confident. The sergeant frowned. "That won't hold." His eyes lingered on the suspect before he left the room, uneasy. Minutes stretched. One officer tapped his boot against the wall. Another cracked his knuckles. Their target still hadn't spoken. Not a demand, not a denial, just that steady presence, as if he were waiting for them to catch up to a truth already decided. The younger officer who had run the database kept glancing at the computer screen. The words "access denied" replayed in his head. He hadn't told them the whole story. The third attempt hadn't just locked him out. The system had sent a notification he wasn't supposed to see. Unauthorized search flagged, report forwarded. He hadn't dared mention it, but the pit in his stomach was growing. Back in the room, one officer leaned forward, slamming his hand on the metal table. "Say something. You think staring us down makes you untouchable?" His voice cracked at the edges. The man didn't flinch. His eyes tracked the officer slowly, the way a predator watches prey wasting its energy. The silence made the outburst feel smaller, not bigger. They tried another tactic. A different officer circled behind him, speaking low. "If you cooperate, this ends easy. If you don't, county will break you. You'll wish you had talked." The threat hung in the air, but the weight never landed. The man's stillness absorbed it, leaving nothing behind. The sergeant returned with a body cam device in his hand, scowling. "Footage from the stop is corrupted. Files won't open." The room stiffened. "Then rewrite it," someone said quickly. But the sergeant shook his head. "It's not a glitch. Looks like the entire segment is missing." His voice dropped lower. "Wiped clean." Unease rippled through the group. Their safety net was gone. Normally, body cam footage could be edited, delayed, or filed away until attention died down, but a complete blackout? That was something else. The younger officer finally spoke. "Maybe we should call this in. Something doesn't add up." His suggestion was met with stares. None of them wanted to admit the same thought, but it was already there. They weren't in control. In the holding room, the man adjusted his posture slightly. The first movement in nearly an hour. Shoulders rolled back, chin lifted. The small shift felt enormous, as if he had declared without words that time was running out, just not for him. One officer muttered under his breath, "Who is this guy?" No one answered. For the first time, the silence in the station didn't belong to him. It belonged to them. The room had become unbearable. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the air stale and heavy. Officers who had once swaggered now lingered in corners, their energy fraying. Every glance at the silent man in the chair unsettled them further. His composure was absolute. It wasn't the silence of fear, but the silence of someone who knew he held the advantage. The younger officer finally broke the tension. I tried running his name 3 times. The system blocked me. It flagged my access. His voice cracked, drawing sharp looks from the others. The sergeant barked, "So, that happens." But it didn't. They all knew it. Civilian records never triggered alerts that bounced back to Washington. That kind of lockout belonged to federal files. One officer slammed the table. "Who the hell are you?" Still nothing. The man's eyes remained fixed, steady, cutting through the room like glass. The silence was worse than words. It forced them to hear themselves. The sergeant pulled out a body cam from the earlier stop. He connected it to the monitor, trying to bring up the footage. Error screens appeared. Files corrupted, segments missing. He cursed under his breath. This isn't an accident. Someone scrubbed it. The officers shifted uneasily. Without the footage, they couldn't rewrite the story. Their shield against accountability had vanished. Whispers filled the station. The word "setup" floated through the air. Another muttered, "This feels like a sting." But pride and fear kept them from admitting it outright. To say it aloud meant acknowledging that the man in custody had walked them into their own trap. The man finally moved. He leaned forward, cuffs clinking softly against the steel table. His voice, deep and calm, filled the room for the first time. "Do you know what happens when you cross the wrong line?" The words were not shouted, yet they struck with more force than any threat. The room fell silent. Every officer froze, caught off guard by the tone. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. The sergeant forced a laugh. "You think you can scare us with riddles? You're nobody here." The man tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. "Nobody doesn't trigger restricted databases. Nobody doesn't wipe body cam footage in real time." His words were precise, clinical, undeniable. The laughter died instantly. The door to the holding room opened. A lieutenant stepped in, holding a phone to his ear. His face was pale. He gestured for the sergeant to follow him into the hall. Outside, voices rose in frantic whispers. The call had come from the state attorney's office, demanding details about a high-priority detainee flagged by federal oversight. The lieutenant stammered that they had no name. The voice on the other end cut him off cold. "Release him immediately." Back inside, the officers' masks were slipping. Their arrogance was bleeding into panic. The man sat still, watching. He hadn't demanded freedom. He hadn't argued innocence. He simply waited for the inevitable. And now the inevitable had arrived. The sergeant stormed back in, red-faced. "You think calling friends in high places gets you out? Not here." He pointed a finger across the table. "This is our town. Our rules." The man finally smiled, faint but unmistakable. "Your rules ended the moment you put those cuffs on me." A sharp knock echoed through the station, then another. Doors opened, footsteps heavy and deliberate. The front desk officer hurried in, eyes wide. "You need to see this." The sergeant pushed past him and froze. The lobby was filling with agents in dark suits, badges flashing. Their presence was calm, professional, but suffocating. These weren't locals. This was federal. The commander stood, rising slowly, the cuffs still binding his wrists. He looked at the sergeant as if the chains were nothing more than theater. "I gave you every chance to stop yourselves," he said quietly. "But you insisted." He stepped forward and the agents entered the room, one unlocking the cuffs in a single motion. The metal fell away, clattering against the table. The officers watched, paralyzed, as the man straightened his sleeves. The badge that appeared in his hand silenced the room. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Deputy Director, Counterterrorism Command. He didn't slam it on the table. He didn't need to. Its weight was undeniable. "You profiled me. You assaulted me. You fabricated charges," he said, his tone even, his words measured like an indictment. "You thought I was an easy target. Instead, you handed me everything I need for a civil rights investigation that will dismantle this department piece by piece." No one moved. The sergeant opened his mouth, but no words came. The arrogance that had fueled him collapsed under the reality of who stood before him. The commander gestured to one of his agents. A laptop was placed on the table, the screen flickering to life. Every second of the stop appeared in crisp video. The confrontation, the insults, the shove into the squad car, all captured from multiple angles. The officers stared in disbelief. Their own body cams had been scrubbed, but the FBI had its own feed. Hidden drones had hovered above the street. Backup recording devices were already embedded in the car. Nothing had been missed. "This is the real footage," the commander said, "not the version you planned to write." The word footage landed like a hammer. They knew what it meant. The evidence was undeniable, the misconduct irrefutable, and soon the entire nation would see it. An officer stammered, "We didn't know," but the commander cut him off with a raised hand. "That's the problem. You never care who you're targeting. You see skin before you see humanity, and you call that policing." His eyes locked on each of them one by one, leaving no room to hide. The federal agents began moving through the station, seizing files, securing computers, collecting weapons. Every desk, every drawer, every record would be examined. This wasn't just about a wrongful arrest. This was the beginning of a federal sweep, a full civil rights investigation. The commander's voice carried across the room once more. "Your body cams failed because they don't belong to you anymore. They belong to the public. They belong to the truth. And the truth is that this department operates on intimidation, not justice." No one argued. Their silence wasn't defiance now. It was fear. The same fear they had once thrived on inflicting. The balance had shifted entirely. The commander walked to the door, agents forming around him. Before leaving, he looked back at the sergeant, whose shoulders sagged under the weight of inevitability. "Remember this moment," he said. "It's the last time you'll wear that badge." With that, he stepped into the lobby, where the sun still blazed outside. The cuffs were gone. The silence was broken, and the station that once believed itself untouchable had become the crime scene. The precinct that once pulsed with bravado now felt hollow. The badges that had gleamed on blue uniforms only an hour ago seemed to weigh heavy on their owners. The FBI agents moved with clinical precision, gathering files, copying hard drives, locking down evidence before panic could erase it. The hum of printers and the shuffle of paperwork was replaced with silence, broken only by clipped commands. Tag it, seal it, move it. The commander stood in the center of the storm, watching the department unravel. His presence was steady, calculated. He didn't shout, didn't threaten. He simply let the weight of his authority fill the space until every officer understood that the ground beneath them had shifted permanently. The sergeant, pale and trembling, finally found his voice. "You can't do this. This is entrapment. You set us up." The words stumbled out, weak even to his own ears. The commander turned, his gaze sharp. "Entrapment? No. This is exposure. We didn't force you to racially profile me on a public street. We didn't tell you to invent charges or scrub body cam footage. Those were your choices. We just made sure the world could see them." His voice was calm, but the precision of his words cut deeper than anger. An agent wheeled in a cart stacked with binders pulled from the records office. Labels stretched back years. Traffic stops, arrest logs, complaint forms. Each one represented a life touched, and often broken, by misconduct. The commander gestured toward the mountain of files. "This isn't about today. This is about a pattern, a system you built and protected." Officers exchanged uneasy glances. They knew what was buried in those files: wrongful arrests, fabricated reports, complaints ignored. In the past, those papers had been their shield, locked away from public scrutiny. Now they were evidence. The younger officer who had first run the database looked as if his world had collapsed. His career, barely begun, was ending in the wreckage of the department's arrogance. He whispered, "Sir, what happens now?" His question wasn't defiance, it was fear. edged with a trace of regret. The commander studied him before answering. "What happens now is accountability. A federal task force will take over this precinct. Every report will be reviewed. Every officer will be questioned. Every victim will have a voice." The word victim rang in the air, heavy, undeniable. Another agent entered with a box of evidence bags. Inside were confiscated phones, unreported cash, even a drawer of unregistered weapons. The sight drained the last color from the sergeant's face. This was no longer just a matter of racial profiling. It was corruption in plain view. The commander addressed the room. "I didn't come here to make a scene. I came to test whether the rumors about this department were true. Today you answered for yourselves, and now you will answer to the law." The sergeant snapped, desperation leaking through his voice. "You'll destroy us over one mistake?" "One mistake?" The commander's eyes narrowed. "How many lives have you destroyed because you thought no one would hold you accountable? How many families torn apart by false arrests? How many citizens silenced by fear?" His words built like a verdict. "No, this isn't one mistake. This is a culture." The agents began escorting officers out, reading them their rights. The irony burned. The same Miranda warnings they had so often recited with smug authority were now turned back on them. Their wrists, once accustomed to snapping cuffs on others, now felt the bite of metal themselves. Outside, news vans had gathered. Word had spread fast. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras rolled. Headlines would soon fill screens nationwide. FBI commander targeted in wrongful arrest. Local police department under federal investigation. The story wasn't just about one man anymore. It was about a system exposed in broad daylight. The commander stepped into the lobby, facing the press. Microphones angled forward, eager for a statement. His voice carried steady, deliberate. What happened today was not an isolated incident. It was a window into systemic abuse of power, racial profiling, fabricated charges, suppressed evidence. These practices have no place in American policing. This department has operated without oversight for too long. That ends now. Questions erupted. Were you undercover? How long has this investigation been planned? What happens to the officers involved? He answered each with surgical precision. This was part of a federal oversight operation designed to monitor civil rights violations. Today's wrongful arrest confirmed what our data already suggested. Effective immediately, a federal task force will oversee all operations in this precinct. Officers found complicit in misconduct will face charges. Victims of abuse will be contacted directly as part of a broader civil rights investigation. The words civil rights investigation landed like a thunderclap. The crowd of reporters pressed closer, scribbling furiously. Across the country, those words carried weight. They signaled more than punishment. They signaled reform. Back inside, officers who hadn't yet been escorted out huddled together, whispering. Their world of unchecked authority had shattered in a single afternoon. Some tried to rationalize, insisting the FBI had gone too far. Others sat quietly, already realizing their careers were finished. The commander re-entered the holding room. The table was empty now, the cuffs gone, but the air still carried the echo of what had unfolded. He spoke softly, almost to himself, though every agent nearby heard it clearly. Justice isn't about who carries the biggest badge. It's about who carries the truth. Agents nodded, their work continuing. Evidence was logged, computers seized, files boxed. The department was no longer a place of power. It was a crime scene under federal control. Hours passed. The sun outside dipped lower, casting long shadows across the town. Residents gathered in small clusters, whispering as black SUVs rolled out of the precinct parking lot, carrying officers in custody. For years, these residents had lived under intimidation. Today, they saw something different: accountability. At a press conference later that evening, the commander stood at a podium, flanked by federal officials. "This operation was never about one stop," he said. "It was about a culture of misconduct. Today's events will not end here. We are expanding this investigation statewide. Departments that engage in racial profiling, in wrongful arrests, in the abuse of body cam footage, know this. You are being watched. Reporters scribbled the phrase, "You are being watched," across their notes. It was both a warning and a promise. The commander's voice lowered for his final words. The badge is not a license to abuse. It is a responsibility to protect. And when that responsibility is betrayed, we will act. The cameras captured his face, resolute under the glare of lights. Across the nation, viewers would hear those words, some with hope, others with fear. The ripple effect had already begun. That night, as the last FBI vehicles departed, the precinct stood dark and silent. For the first time in decades, it was not a fortress of unchecked power. It was a monument to accountability, a reminder that even the most feared commander was willing to sit in silence, let arrogance reveal itself, and then turn the system against those who thought they owned it. The sting had worked, the trap had closed, and the reckoning had only just begun. By nightfall, the precinct was silent, stripped of its swagger. Desks stood empty, files sealed in boxes, and officers once untouchable now sat in custody. The very walls that had sheltered arrogance for years had become evidence of its collapse. Outside, townspeople gathered under the glow of street lamps. Some whispered disbelief, others let out quiet sighs of relief. For years, many had lived with fear and humiliation, believing no one would ever stand up to the abuse of power. Yet in one afternoon, that illusion had been shattered. At the center of it stood the commander. He hadn't raised his voice or brandished his authority like a weapon. Instead, he had shown the power of patience, the strength of silence, and the discipline of control. He walked calmly into the trap, knowing the truth would expose itself. That lesson was as personal as it was systemic. Before leaving, he turned to the cameras. This wasn't about me, he said. It was about accountability. Law enforcement is not a privilege, it is a responsibility. And when responsibility is abandoned, justice will find its way back. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of an oath renewed. For those watching, the message was clear. Injustice often hides in plain sight, disguised as routine. Abuse of power thrives when people believe they are powerless. But silence, when chosen wisely, can be strategy. Patience can be resistance. And truth, when revealed at the right moment, can topple even the strongest facade. The town learned that lesson. The country would hear it too. By dawn, headlines spoke of wrongful arrest, racial profiling, federal oversight, civil rights investigation. Yet beneath the headlines was something deeper, a reminder that justice is not abstract. It lives in choices, in courage, in the willingness to stand steady when others expect you to fall. As the commander's SUV disappeared into the night, the people who watched him go didn't just see an FBI official. They saw a man who carried himself with dignity when it mattered most. And that was the personal lesson left behind. Power is not proven in force, but in the ability to hold your ground, even in silence, until the truth speaks louder than any badge. Because in the end, justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits, and when it arrives, it leaves no doubt about where it stands.